Go back here. My name's Todd McCauley. I'm the Financial Wellbeing Officer and Benefits. I work in Human Resources. Thanks for joining us. This is the final of a series of financial or well-being presentations put on through Health and Wellness here at UK. My role is to help UK employees with their finances, any money-related decisions that they're dealing with. So I try to help people manage financial stress, and certainly this time of year, financial stress is part of the holiday season for a lot of people. But I'm going to talk a little bit about how to eliminate some of that stress by a concept I call MoneyWell or moneying well. So to MoneyWell, I think you need to have three things. The first is that you need to be intentional with how you're spending your money. And to be intentional with how you spend your money requires a plan. And to develop a plan, you have to do some preparation ahead of time. But the fact of the matter is that most of us spend more time planning a vacation than we do planning how to spend our money, or planning, a lot of folks will spend more time planning a vacation than something really important like retirement, right? So there are steps that you can take to be more prepared, and that's what we're going to talk about today, kind of the process of developing this plan, implementing the plan, and monitoring the plan. So this, in my opinion, is the planning process that you should always be going through, and it's a cyclical process, right? So you want to identify your values, you want to create your plan based on those values, and then you want to monitor your plan. And then because your values are constantly changing or fluctuating throughout your life, different things take different priorities, then you want to revisit your values and then recreate the plan and then monitor the plan again. So it's cyclical, right? So these three steps, I think they're all important. What I find most often is that people skip this first step and they just start trying to create a plan for how to use their money, and they haven't taken the time to sit down, especially if they're planning with somebody else, if you're planning with a spouse or significant other. Identifying your shared values, if you're going to come up with a shared financial plan, is a really important step, and I think most people just jump right over it. So when it comes to money, I encourage people to ask themselves these three questions. You want to ask yourself, why is money important to you? Right? So money itself has no intrinsic value unless you're Scrooge McDuck and you like swimming around in piles of gold. Like there's nothing you can really do with the physical money, right? Or things you can't stack it up, you can't count it. I mean, some people get a sense of security by just carrying around some cash, or they think it's cool to do that, but it doesn't really have any intrinsic value. It's what you can exchange the money for that's important, right? And whether we realize it or not, by being here at UK every day, we're exchanging our most precious resource, which is time, for money, right? So we already are kind of making this assessment of what our time is worth monetarily, and then we make assessments of what other things are worth in money. So this is security for my family, providing an education for my kids, putting food on the table, right? Keeping the heat on, keeping the water running in our house. Like those are all priorities. That's what's important to me. And obviously I need money to accomplish a lot of that. You also want to think about past experiences that you've had with money. And this is usually pretty eye-opening, but if you think of your first memories of money, my first memories include always ordering the least expensive thing on the kids menu, right? And my parents didn't tell me to do that. I went into economics as a degree. So I was always doing this value calculation in my head. Like, is a cheeseburger really worth $2 more than a grilled cheese? Right? To me, it wasn't. So I was always ordering the grilled cheese. And then eventually my parents caught on and said, Todd, you don't have to get the least expensive thing on the kids menu every time you order. I said, well, if a grilled cheese is going to fill me up just as much as a cheeseburger, why would I pay $2 more for a cheeseburger? Right? So if I shared that story with my wife, she would understand that I'm thrifty by genetics. It's not just how I was raised. It's just part of my personality. So thinking of those past experiences and sharing those experiences with a significant other, especially if you're planning with somebody else, is really eye-opening because they obviously had different past experiences with money than you did, right? So they came up in a different family, they were raised in a different family, very different experience with money possibly. And then you also want to think about what you want to accomplish. Often money is part of life goals. So if you think of what life goals you want to accomplish and then think of money as a tool to accomplish those goals, I think that's usually helpful. Because some people will not consider themselves motivated by money, right? They just aren't. But they may be motivated by other things that require money to do that, right? So if they're motivated by where they can travel, where they can visit, if they're motivated by spending time with family, if they're motivated by being able to buy things for their family, That's obviously, there's a money component to those. One of the things that makes money stressful is that our actions don't always line up with our behavior, right? Or with our values. Like our behaviors, our actions don't always line up with our values. And that's true with money, and it creates internal tension, right? If you're doing things with your money that is different than what either is explicitly or implicitly stated as your values, then it's going to be stressful, right? So a personal situation to share in my own life, my mother was mortified when my sister, who lives here in town with us, bought me Taco Bell gift cards for Christmas last year, right? I'm kind of a health food nut. I don't like to eat fast food, and my mother knows that, but my sister knows me a little bit better than my mother does because she's here in town, and she knows that if I'm on my way home from work and I've skipped lunch entirely, I might just go through Taco Bell and get Taco Bell, right? So if I constantly did that, my values wouldn't be lining up with my actions, and it would be a source of stress for me, right? If I do it occasionally, it's just a guilty pleasure, right? And so I think as much as we can get our values to line up with our actions when it comes to money, it makes spending money or using money inherently less stressful, right? So if I talk to a couple and I do one-on-one counseling or couples counseling with people, either it's a UK employee or not a UK employee, and I'll sit down with people, and if there's tension about how money's being spent or used, 99.9% of the time it's because they've skipped this whole step of discussing the values. And so the money is a symptom of the values being out of whack, or the stress that the money is causing is a symptom of not having this values discussion first. So I think it's really important to do this. It's also important, I think, for individuals planning, just because, like I said, if this doesn't create stress in the relationship, it may create internal stress just because your values and your actions are out of whack. So now that we talked a little bit about our values, we want to talk about how to create the plan. And I'm going to talk about 3 buckets or parts of the plan that I think are crucially important, and I'll tell you why each one of them is important. So you want to include giving, saving, and spending in your plan. Now, the obviously one we think of when we think of a spending plan, right? Just how we're going to spend our money. But the giving and the saving, I think, are as important, if not more important, than the spending component of somebody's plan. So there's 3 reasons why I think giving is important to include in your plan. You want to give first in your plan, because if you give something, you're tricking your brain into thinking that you have more than you need, right? If you give, and it can be as little as $5 a month, give something to somebody, right? Just give something away. It automatically rewires your brain to say like, oh, I have more than I need, so now I'm working from a situation of abundance rather than a situation of scarcity or a mindset of scarcity, right? So if you give something away, it helps right immediately just flip that switch in your brain. You want to give from your heart. So pick something that you're passionate about. If you have loved ones that have suffered from different illnesses, give to a cause that researches that illness. If you care about underserved segments of the population, give for basic needs for those segments of the population. Just give something that you have an emotional response to is going to be a better thing to give to, because you're going to be able to harness your emotions to help reinforce that decision, right? So emotions get in our way in spending, and I'll talk about that a little bit in the spending area, but they can actually help with the giving and the saving. If you can line up what you're giving with an emotional response or passion you have, then that helps. You want to give for your heart. And what I mean by this is, if you hold tightly to something, then it is going to create stress, and it's going to feel like that thing is controlling you, right? But if you hold on to something loosely, then it's not going to feel like it's controlling you as much, right? So I constantly hear from people that they feel like their money controls their life, that they don't control their money, right? So just a quick exercise to show what I mean by this. Squeeze your fist as hard as you can, and now try to wiggle your arm, the one that you're squeezing, right? It's not very easy to wiggle your arm. I mean, you can feel the tension all the way up to your shoulder usually when you squeeze really hard there. Now open your hand and hold it loosely, and now try to wiggle your arm. It's much easier to move, right? So your hand is actually controlling your whole arm when you squeeze tightly to something. So trying to loosen your grip on money can often help feel like the money is not controlling you as much. Does that make sense? So those are the 3 reasons I think that people should include giving in their plan. And I think you need to include it first because it flips your mindset. You need to give to something you're passionate about because you'll feel a sense of contribution or contributing to that cause. And then it also gives your money less control over you or less control over your situation if you give. So the second part of our plan after giving is saving. And I suggest doing in this order. So you want to save next. And again, we want to tap into your emotions when it comes to saving. Find something that you're passionate about. Something that you can't afford in 1 month that you're passionate about having is something that is a good candidate to save for, right? So if you save a certain percentage of your pay, and we'll talk a little bit at the end of the presentation about some rules of thumb for percentages to save. But if you save, let's say you save 5% of your take-home pay, whatever that dollar amount is, pick something that you can't buy with 1 month's worth of whatever that dollar amount is. And it's a perfect candidate for saving, right? If you haven't saved for things in the past, just something that takes 2 months worth of whatever that dollar amount is a great place to start. Because what we want to try to break the cycle of is paying for things before we have the money. And then, or let's rephrase that. We want to break the cycle of borrowing someone else's money to pay for something and then paying out of your money for that over time, right? Which is what most Americans do with easy access to credit. We use credit cards, we pay for something we don't have the money for, we use the bank's money to do that, and then we pay for that gradually over time. So we want to break that cycle and save for things in advance and then pay for them, right? So that's easier to do. It's easier to stay committed to that saving. It's something that you're passionate about, right? So if you're passionate enough about it, it's going to be front of mind. You're going to think about it. You're not going to have to remember what you're saving for. You know, if there's a picture or you're saving for a vacation, cut out a picture of where you're going and tape it on your mirror or put it next to your mirror so you see it every morning. Put it next to your desk at work so you see it every day that you're at work, right? It reminds you that you're saving for something, right? You want to trust your future self, right? And this may seem like a weird turn of phrase, but saving is really spending in the future, right? You're saving to have money to spend in the future. You don't really save just for the sake of saving. They call that hoarding, right? So I don't encourage people to hoard their money and just save for no reason, right? If you have identified something you're passionate about, you know why you're saving, and then you're trusting your future self to follow the plan and spend that money on what you're planning to spend it on in the future, right? I like trusting my future self because I know that my future self is going to have more information available than I have now, right? Time would have passed. Maybe the thing I'm saving for isn't as important as I thought it was now that I've waited a few months to get there, because now I have more information than I did when I started saving for it, right? So you want to trust your future self to follow the plan once you start saving for it. And then you want to fix it so that you don't forget it. Okay, so you want to automate your saving as much as possible because it's really easy to forget to save, right? Hopefully by finding something to save for that you're passionate about, you won't forget to save, but it happens pretty regularly that someone will say, oh, I meant to save for this and I just forgot to do it. Well, automate it. Set up an automatic transfer from your checking account where your direct deposit goes in to a savings account of some sort, right? So the credit union I know has specific accounts for vacation savings, for holiday savings, for various different types of accounts that you can set up, and you can automate those transfers. And I think it makes a lot of sense to have a different savings account for each savings goal that you have. And that way you keep the money separate, and at a glance you can see, okay, I know my vacation is going to cost $1,000 and I've got $800 in my vacation account. I'm really close, right? So you can tell right at a glance how close you are to reaching that goal. And it can reinforce and encourage you to save more by seeing it separately rather than commingled with all your other funds. So as much as possible, automate that saving. So you want to find something you're passionate about to save for. You want to trust your future self to stick to the plan. And then you want to fix it so you don't forget to set aside that savings. So with spending, it's a little bit different. So with spending, or with giving and saving, we talked about tapping into emotion to try to encourage that behavior. With savings, or excuse me, with spending, we really have to try to remove the emotion from our spending decisions, right? Because emotions are what most marketing companies are trying to target with all the advertisements that we're bombarded with constantly, right? And even the companies that are now letting us pay with our cell phones are trying to tap into our emotions, because waving feels good to people. It's hard to wave and frown. You should try it sometime. It's hard to do, right? Naturally, when you start waving, you smile, right? Because usually you're greeting somebody, or you're waving goodbye, or you want to seem friendly, right? So we wave our phones to pay for things because it makes us feel good. And so marketing companies have figured that out, and that's why they have us wave our phones, because it feels good then to spend money. So you want to realize that if they're trying to tap into your emotions, as much as you can eliminate those emotional responses to spending, the better off you'll be. So I think the three keys to doing that is that you want to forget the past when it comes to spending decisions, right? That is already done. There is nothing that you can do, or very rarely is there anything that you can do to change past decisions you've made about spending. So you want to forget about that and just move on. You want to forgive the future, because like I said in that diagram with the two circles, when your actions and your values don't line up, we just call that being human. You are going to make future spending mistakes. I am going to make future spending mistakes. I know this, right? No one is perfect. I'm very type A. I'm a perfectionist, both genetically and I think a little bit by the nurturing part of things as well. But it's impossible to be perfect with how we're spending our money. So you want to anticipate that, hey, you're going to make mistakes. You're going to come up with a plan, and the plan isn't going to be executed perfectly. Life's going to happen. But you want to be forgiving yourself ahead of time for those mistakes, right? What's most important is that you finish strong, right? The greatest thing about money decisions, in my opinion, is that there's always another one, right? There's always a next chance to make a wiser decision when it comes to how you're spending your money, right? So I used to work for a food-based wellness company, and it was the whole idea with food as well. How many times throughout the day are we making decisions about food, right? So if we made a poor decision with our last choice, we are going to be presented shortly with another opportunity, right? Another chance to make a better choice. And it's the same thing with money. We make money decisions every day. We've probably made 20 money decisions before we even make it to our desk at work, right? Because you've driven past a Starbucks, you've driven past a fast food place, you've driven past a gas station, you've passed all these things, and you've made decisions, whether conscious or not, to not spend your money or to spend your money as you're going to work. Right? So you're constantly making these choices about money. So you want to forget the past, forgive the future, and then try to finish strong. So just focus on that next choice that you're making with money. When it comes to this plan that we're creating for our money, I commonly get asked, how often do I have to do this? How specific does it need to be? How long do I need to do it? And the short answer is that you need to do this for the rest of your life, right? So it's one of those behaviors, exercising, eating healthy, sleeping, that is just really important to have integrated into your lifestyle and to consistently do if you truly want to be intentional with how you're spending your money. So you want to have a plan before you spend, ideally, right? So if we come up with a plan for January, we want to have that plan completed and have a conversation with anyone else that's involved in the plan before December ends and January starts. Because January 1st, we're probably going to spend money. Mortgage or rent usually is the first of the month, right? So you're automatically going to start spending money right away. You want the plan in place before that happens. You want to have a plan every month, okay? Some months you're going to be better at executing the plan, and the plan can change from month to month. Some months it may be the same, but you want to have a plan of some sort in place every month before the month starts. And then you want to have a plan for every dollar. So the type of budgeting that I include, or I encourage folks at UK to use, is called zero-sum budgeting. So your income has to exactly equal the combination of saving, giving, and spending, right? So those two things have to equal zero, right? When you take your income and you subtract the giving, the saving, and the spending, you should get zero. This spreadsheet, and I'm happy to email this out to people, my email will be at the end of the presentation, is a great way to do that. So you see that little green bar at the top? That will only turn green if your spending exactly equals your income, or those three categories added up exactly equal your income. And you can see that this sheet starts with giving and then includes saving and then has spending categories below it. So it has it in the order that I think is best to approach the plan. And it also incorporates that zero sum idea. So the bar at the top will be yellow if your categories haven't quite reached your income. If the categories below exceed your income, it'll turn red. So ideally, every month before the month starts, you get that bar to be green, that you know every dollar that's coming in, I've got a plan for, right? And that's really what being intentional is. A really close parallel that I would draw this to is how people use their calendars to manage their time, right? So if you really want to be intentional with how you're using your time at work, hopefully people have heard of this concept of time blocking, right? So you won't just have meetings on your calendar, but you'll have blocks of time to accomplish specific things if it's really a priority to accomplish that. So it's helpful to have, you know, time set aside in advance to do specific things that you want to do, right? So I schedule my workout on my calendar, a recurring meeting that's there for the rest of the time that I have my calendar, basically, right? So every day I'm seeing a block of time to work out. So that helps me know that, hey, I've set aside this time, nothing's going to get scheduled over top of it. And so I can execute the plan and it'll work, right? Same thing with spending. If you come up with a plan before the month starts, have it in writing. Not to say you can't adjust the plan if you need to, but at least you had a plan to start with, and it included every dollar. So I want to talk briefly about budget busters, because what will happen inevitably is that someone will prepare that first budget and they'll forget something, right? They won't include an expense that they don't pay every month. It's only paid maybe once a year or twice a year, or they'll get caught off guard by something that's in retrospect common sense that they just forgot to include because they spend the money automatically and they don't even think about it, right? Those non-monthly expenses you want to turn into a dollar amount, a monthly amount, right? So you take the expenses that you pay every year, you divide them by 12, the expenses you pay every 6 months, you divide them by 6. You add all those monthly amounts together, and then you have an automatic transfer go from your checking account into your savings account for that combination of that amount, whatever the total is for those. You can keep a separate list of those non-monthly expenses. You know, if you're like using spreadsheets, you can use it to do the math for you and total it up and tell you exactly how much you need to have transferred from your checking to your savings each month. And then when one of those expenses comes in, all you have to do is confirm it's on your list, move the money from your savings to your checking account, and pay the bill, and you're done, right? So it didn't affect your budget at all that month, other than that automatic transfer that happened. And you can pay the bill without having to worry about, oh, did I plan for this month? Because very few of us can cash flow those annual bills, right? I can't afford to pay my full life insurance premium out of 1 month's worth of income, right? I need to turn that into a monthly amount and save for it throughout the year so that I can pay it in January when it's due, right? So it's holiday time of year. So I think holiday spending is a perfect example of a budget buster, right? Because a lot of us can't cash flow the money that we spend in maybe October, November, and December for holiday gifts, right? We can't do it. And this happened to us personally shortly after moving here to Kentucky from Massachusetts 3 years ago. All the expenses, all the incomes changed. And we got to January and the bill came for Christmas and we couldn't pay it. And so, you know, Mr. Finance guy, I was like, oh, I'll just leave $100 on the check, on the credit card, and I'll pay it next month, thinking I'm going to borrow $100 and I'll just pay it back next month. Well, I should have known this, but if you don't, here's a public service announcement. Once you carry a balance on a credit card, they can go back to the beginning of the billing cycle and charge you daily interest for your balance throughout that whole billing cycle, right? So that was Christmas time. We were making a lot of purchases, and so we were getting charged interest retroactively for those purchases once I carried a balance, once I didn't pay it off in full. And then because I didn't pay it off in full until February, they can do it for the whole next cycle, monthly billing cycle as well. So I basically usually I just use a credit card to float the purchases and pay them all off the next month. It's a good way to earn rewards, but you know, rewards are also in place because we need to be enticed to use these things, right? So that $100 that I borrowed cost me $30 of interest, right? So in my eyes, I was borrowing $100. That's not how the credit card company saw it, right? So you got to be careful with things. And it's really easy to buy things seasonally, that you can't afford that month, right? So you can turn it into a monthly amount as well. But another strategy I suggest people use with holiday spending is to ask yourself why you're making the purchase. And that might sound simple, but rarely do we stop and think, okay, why am I buying this thing for this person, right? Is it what they really want? Is it because I saw an ad and I'm getting a good deal on it? You know, if you're buying something because it's just on sale, then the trick I like to encourage people to use with that is ask yourself if you would pay full price for it. And if you wouldn't pay full price for it, then you probably shouldn't buy it if it's on sale. I know it's counterintuitive, but it lets you know if you're motivated just by the fact that it's on sale more than the fact that you want or need that item, right? But I think another important thing to ask yourself is if you're speaking the same language as the person that you're buying this gift for. So I don't know if anybody's heard of Gary Chapman and this book called 5 Love Languages, right? But buying gifts is one way to express love. It's not the only way to express love. And most of us are buying gifts this time of year to show the people that we care about that we love them, right? You can also express love through physical touch. You can express it through quality time. You can express it through words of affirmation. And the 5th one, and acts of service, yes. So, and then gifts, buying gifts, right? Or receiving gifts, that's another love language, right? But if you look at how my languages personally rank, words of affirmation is number 1, acts of service is number 2. The next 2 are a close tie, but receiving gifts is 0 on my scale, right? I get that does not communicate love to me at all when people buy me things, right? And so it's hard for me this time of year when that's what people want to do for you, is buy you things. And I say, no, don't buy me anything. Just come spend time with me, or come help me with something I need done around the house, right? So if you're in a relationship with someone whose love languages are significantly different than yours, then I think it involves a conversation either internally or with that person to say, okay, how best can I show this person that I love them this time of year? And it might not include anything or have anything to do with money or spending. So I think just asking yourselves that question is helpful. And then the other thing that you can do to help with holiday spending is save throughout the year, right? So turning that, after what happened that first year that we were here in January and not being able to pay the bill, I finally told my wife that we couldn't just cash flow Christmas. We can't just buy a bunch of stuff and then hope that we have enough money to pay for it come January, right? So we turned what we know we want to spend for Christmas into a monthly amount, and we automatically have that transferred from our checking account into a savings account. And the credit union, another free plug for the credit union here at UK, they have holiday savings accounts where in October that money is automatically moved into your main savings account, right? So you can see exactly what that transfer was, and that's what your holiday budget is, right? So when you start shopping, maybe you're that proactive. I'm not that proactive, but if you start shopping in October, then you know what amount of money you have available to spend for that. So saving throughout the year, I think, is really helpful. And it eliminates, for me at least, because I'm type A and I like having a plan in place, it eliminates a lot of the stress of spending money during the holidays. Because just spending money and hoping that I'm gonna have the money to pay for it stresses me out, right? Every dollar that we spend stresses me out a little bit more, right? But if I know that there's a certain amount that we've already earmarked and we've set aside, then I can freely spend that money and I don't have to worry about being stuck with the bill I can't pay come January. So I said I'd go over some rules of thumb for a healthy budget. So this is from an article that Fidelity has available. I'm happy to email people the article if they want to look at it. I like it because it's easy to remember, not because I think it's some magical formula, right? So they call it the 50-15-5 rule. So you want to spend about 50% of your take-home pay on essentials. And I encourage people to think, when I say essentials, I mean global essentials. I mean a roof over your head, clothes on your back, food on the table, running water, electricity. I don't mean an unlimited data plan. I don't mean Hulu, Netflix, and Amazon Prime. It's global essentials, what people need worldwide to live. We are constantly marketed to that the next great thing is essential as well, but you want to try to undo some of that thinking if you can. Save 15% for retirement, which is great here at UK, because if you do the match plan, which anybody over the age of 30 is required to do, you're automatically saving the 15%. And it's not on net pay, it's actually on your gross pay. So you're doing good there. And then you want to save 5% for something else. So if you're looking for a target for that savings category, after you give something and you're looking at what I should save, take 5% of that income number at the top of that spreadsheet, and that's what you may try to shoot for savings. And it can be divided any number of different ways into different buckets, but try to save about 5%. What the 5 and the 15% do is make sure that you're living within your means, right? If you're saving 15% for retirement, and then when you get your check, you save 5% of whatever comes in, then you know that you're not spending more than you make, right? Because you've created guardrails, so to speak, on your spending. And you'll see, you don't have to be a mathematician to see that it doesn't add up to 100, right? So there's still 30%. I'm not a total miser, right? I do let people spend money. I do encourage people to spend discretionarily on things that are non-essential. You have 30% left to do that if you use this formula. So there's still some room to do some things discretionarily within a plan. So we talked about identifying your values. We talked about creating the plan. I know that we are got about 5 minutes left, so I'm going to go quickly through how to monitor the plan. This is an important step. And once you get systems in place to monitor the plan, it shouldn't take a lot of ongoing work. It should kind of be self-monitoring, or shouldn't take a lot of heavy lifting once you get the system in place. So the analogy I like to use for a budget is kind of like going on a road trip, right? So a budget, or your plan of how you're going to use your money, is going to hopefully get you from point A, where you are now, to point B, some future goal that you want to get to, right? So your plan is a lot like the gauges on a car, right? It's like the speedometer or the fuel gauge on the car. Very few of us would go on a road trip if we knew that those two parts of the car weren't working properly, right? Because it's going to be tough to get from point A to point B if you don't know when you're going to run out of gas, you don't know how fast you're going, you don't know how slow you're going. You're probably going to end up on the side of the road. You're either going to get pulled over for going too fast or too slow, or you're going to run out of gas, right? So those two gauges on a car, I think everyone would agree, are really important. What I try to encourage people to understand is that if you are spending money without a plan, it's kind of like driving a car without those two gauges working, right? You don't know when the money's going to run out. You don't know how fast you're spending it compared to how fast it's coming in, right? So it's really helpful to make sure that the plan's in place, but you also have to look at the gauges, right? I've seen cars sometimes where people have tape over gauges or over lights that just stay on all the time. And that stresses me out, right? They just kind of ignore those lights and say, that light's been on forever. I'm just going to put a piece of electrician's tape over it and we'll see what happens, right? So that's the ostrich kind of head in the sand approach to finances. It doesn't usually end well, right? The more automated your monitoring is, the less time it's going to take you to monitor the plan, right? So there are apps that you can use. You can leverage technology here to automatically categorize spending as it comes in. My favorite to use is a website called Mint. And then there's an app that you can have on your phone. There are some advertisements because it's a free app. There's other apps that you pay for out there that are just as good but don't have the advertisements. So if you want to know about some of those, I'm happy to share those with folks as well. But Mint is a good place to start. You can link your account, like a debit account or something that you're spending money out of regularly, and it'll automatically categorize those spending and put it into a pie chart for you so you can see how you're spending your money. Envelopes are technology. Not many of us alive today understand what it took to mail a letter without an envelope, but imagine melting a candle and sealing something with wax, right? That's what you had to do before envelopes were invented. So they definitely qualify as technology, in my opinion. So going to the cash envelope route for somebody that really wants to monitor spending in specific areas, pull a certain amount of money and cash out once you get paid, put it in an envelope labeled with that expense, and it's an automatic monitoring device, right? If it's an entertainment amount and you go out to a movie and you open the envelope and there's no cash in it, guess what? You're not going to the movie, right? So it automatically it's a self-monitoring device, right? So if you're disciplined about doing that, the monitoring takes care of itself. So where to start? A couple of next steps that I would give people to start with. So we have a great partnership with a company called iGrad that has a software or website called Enrich. You can go to this bit.ly URL that's on the slide there. I can also email it to people. This is a My Money personality test. So you can go there, you can take an assessment, and it'll give you an idea of what your personality is, some of the pros and cons of that personality, because everybody has a different, like I said, their past experiences, Their values are different, so they're going to treat money differently. So I think knowing what your own money personality is a great place to start, because you can know what your strengths and weaknesses are, where you might get into trouble, and how you can kind of emphasize those strengths when it comes to money. But there are also multiple courses on smart credit usage, banking, saving for college, buying cars, buying a house, that are right through this website. And we pay Enrich to offer this to our employees. You will see no advertisements. They're completely unbiased, right? They have no conflicts of interest, which is why I think it's such a great resource. Because if you Google buying a car online, you're going to get all kinds of advertisements from car dealerships, from car finance companies. And so it's hard to understand exactly how those folks are compensated and motivated. If you want to know financially where to start, just like you're building a house, you want to start with a foundation first, right? So focusing on establishing an emergency fund. You know, a basic emergency fund might be $1,000 in savings. A better emergency fund may be 3 to 6 months of expenses, right? Paying down debt. I always encourage people to at least have that $1,000 in savings first before they aggressively pay down debt. But then sometimes paying down debt is the best way to save, right? It's the same behavior. Saving extra money, earning 0% while you're borrowing money that's costing you more than 0% doesn't make much sense. So usually starting with emergency savings and then moving to paying down debt is a good strategy. Then you want to look at protecting your plans, making sure that you have the right insurance in place, that you have a better emergency fund. Then you can start looking at future goals and planning for those future goals that you want to accomplish. If you have any questions, I'm only an email, a phone call, or an appointment away. So I schedule appointments through an online scheduler called Schedule One. So it's just meetme.so/UKFWB, UK Financial Wellbeing. You can go on there, it syncs with my Outlook calendar, and you can see when I'm available. So I do one-on-one appointments at my office, which is on the second floor of the credit union on Export Street. But I also do Zoom meetings, virtual meetings regularly with that. So it's very easy to set up a time that works for you. If you're planning with somebody else and they can join us for the meeting, that's a great idea as well, either remotely or in person, to bring them. Because usually the telephone game doesn't work very well. That's why we played it as kids, because it was kind of funny, right? To see what the message was by the time it got around the circle. So usually I'll meet with one person and they'll go home and try to paraphrase what I said, and it turns into a very different message by the time it makes it home, right? So please take advantage of what I'm here to help UK employees. I spent 15 years in financial services and came here because I didn't want the conflicts of interest that exist when you're getting paid for the advice that you give people. Here I'm paid a salary by UK just to help people with any financial related decisions they have. So I'm happy to help in any way I can. Questions before we wrap up? I think